to see.
Did you know that 85% of your engine wear occurs at startup? Yes, that is correct, and this is where Lower the Friction comes in by putting a protective, lubricating barrier on all moving parts. This now gives you full-time protection to make your engine last longer, run smoother, give you better performance, and improved fuel economy. People across the country are reporting some very exciting results. Go to lowerthefriction.com, place your order, and enter in promo code SOS to get 5% off of your order. That's lowerthefriction.com. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Secrets of Saturn livestream. I am Jason Lindgren, your host. How are y'all doing out there? I see our chat room is building up quick, both on the D Live and the YouTubes. Hopefully we won't have any repeat of last week. But anyway, this week we're going to have a discussion on...
What happened last week, Jason?
Nothing whatsoever.
Okay.
I think everything was just totally copacetic. But Wayne is with me here, as usual, and the great Baldini, and we're going to be having a discussion on consciousness. It's kind of more of a philosophical
Which is great,
thing.
We all think we're kind of conscious anyway, so I don't know.
I think it's a great topic for this week because I'm fairly close to unconscious. I accidentally took 2 doses of my very powerful opioid painkiller today. I had forgotten I'd taken it earlier, so I took one in the morning, and then I forgot I'd taken it, so I took another one at lunch. And
do that less.
Do that less. I'm with you on that one all day long, Jason. Do that less. So yeah, when we're done, I'll pass out, and don't worry, Rose. I'll be there for the poppycock report bright and early tomorrow morning, as usual.
That's what coffee's for.
Exactly, and I make the world's best coffee. It's so good it makes you swear when you have a sip.
I make a variation on
I'm gonna have
coffee.
to try some.
You are, Wayne. It's fantabulous. It really is good. My wife will she'll she bears witness. She'll give you a hallelujah. Okay, so we're going to do consciousness. Who wants to set this up, Wayne? I think you're the man.
Well, before we get started on that, I just want to talk about something real quick here. And it's something very, very simple. But apparently there's a lot of goobers out there whose brains don't work, and I wonder if they have consciousness. This thing behind me is called a mandala. I got it for, I think, $16 on Amazon because I thought it looked cool. I liked the colors. But here's what a mandala is, in case you are a clueless goober. A Hindu or Buddhist effect. Graphic symbol of the universe. A circle enclosing a square, possibly with a deity on each side. This one does not, because I don't subscribe to any single deity. That is used chiefly, wait for it, as an aid to meditation. Meditating is something that I, in fact, do, which is why I'm so calm most of the time. Anyway, there is your PSA for the week. Who wants to start with the consciousness thing?
That means you worship Satan, right?
Apparently, in some ding-dong's eyes, yes.
I'm sorry, I had to go there. Yeah, it's the mandala. It's the mandala effect.
It is indeed the mandala effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to be confused with the Mandela effect.
Exactly.
Something totally different.
But it used to be spelled mandala, so I'm all confused now.
About that.
Indeed. So, Wayne, you wanna be the guy to kick this off, or Jason, you want to do it?
I'm gonna start with just the mainstream definition of consciousness, and since you guys picked this topic and not me this week, I will probably take a bit of a backseat here and just chime in like I want to do when I see the opportunity and my crowbar happens to be feeling rather sharp. So, consciousness, at its simplest, is awareness or sentience of internal or external existence. Despite centuries of analyses, definitions, explanations, and debates by philosophers and scientists, consciousness remains puzzling and controversial, being at once the most familiar and most mysterious aspect of our lives. Perhaps the only widely agreed notion about the topic is the intuition that it exists. Opinions differ about what exactly needs to be studied and explained as consciousness. Sometimes it is synonymous with the mind, other times just an aspect of the mind. In the past, it was one's inner life, the world of introspection, of private thought, imagination, and volition. Today, with modern research into the brain, it often includes any kind of experience, cognition, feeling, or perception. It may be awareness or awareness of awareness or self-awareness. I personally would say it would be the capability to realize self-existence. I think would be a very easy way to put it, but there's more to it than that. But anyway, I'll kick it to whichever you gentlemen want to take it next. I think we got the general idea from the mainstream blurb.
Yeah, now, generally, when it comes to the idea of consciousness, this kind of really throws a monkey wrench in the works for the materialist view when it comes down to it. When you're looking at your secular humanist view where everything is based on hyper-materialism here, everything's a physical thing. They don't look at spiritual aspects. They look at just purely the physical world. The idea of consciousness really throws a monkey wrench into the works. So they come up with all kinds of different ways to try to describe what it is. And they basically, what quote-unquote mainstream science will think of it as is the byproduct of a chemical electrical effect of the processing of your brain. And that's kind of what they slough it off as. And they kind of boil it all down to a computer algorithm. And this is what they determine is consciousness from this purely physical hyper-materialistic concept. It's a byproduct of the electrical activity of your nervous system. And that's how they define it from the hyper-materialist view. So this is modern science is looking at it. So that this is the thing. Let's lay down the groundwork for that first of all. This is how.
Well, let's also
your current
say
paradigm of. Go ahead, Baldini.
Well, I was going to say, let's also just say that you're right when you say the modern view, but that is a much more recent view within the last 300 years. Prior to that, it was a much deeper and much more philosophic viewpoint, and only with the advent of really the twin, looks of reductionism and hypermaterialism has it come to that view that it is really just a byproduct of electronic synapses, right? The synapse and neuron, whenever it's basically a chemical reaction is the way that they're looking at it. And yet, everything, when you begin to look at it deeply, everything blows that apart. And in fact, the closer you look at this particular problem, which is considered one of the biggest problems in both science and philosophy, the mind-body problem, it knocks huge holes in all of hypermaterialism, all the way to the heliocentric model, all the way to many of the physical models that they present, and scientism at its core. So this is in part why I chose this particular one, because top to bottom, all the way from materialism itself and reductionism, all the way to the creation of general artificial intelligence, this really sticks in the craw of scientism. So that's in particular why I chose this topic tonight. So back to you, Wayne.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful topic to explore, because when it comes down to it, the modern view of science with this hyper-materialist view cannot adequately explain what it is. And, this all boils down to some basic things that were taught in our school system, in our science classes and stuff. And basically they try to categorize everything in this little box of physicality. And consciousness is not something that necessarily fits into the physicality model of things that they have. So that's kind of why they try to cram it together and boil it down to an algorithm, because it's, in the view of this modern science, and this is the stance that most of your transhumanist proponents take, is your consciousness could be boiled down to just an algorithm, because essentially all it is a byproduct of the electrical activity of your nervous system. So if that's the case, then if they could reproduce that, they could reproduce your consciousness. And that's their viewpoint. But I see deep flaws in that viewpoint, simply because there are so many things that model does not explain about consciousness. And those are the things we're going to talk about tonight, specifically things like morphic resonance and things like that. And Baldini, I know you got a lot on that. So
yeah,
go ahead and
that whole transhumanism thing, I almost think it's like a funny joke that's going to be on them at some point in the future. That even if computers get to a point where they could literally map out every tiny little thing in the brain and copy it all as ones and zeros of data, how are you going to get the consciousness in there? I think they're still going to die and pass into whatever the netherworld truly is. And sure, there might be an artificial representation, like a snapshot taken of them at that time, but I don't think they're really going to be there, nor do I think if they could be there, it would be what they think it is.
Right, and again, back to to Wayne's topic about how they consider it just an algorithm that not only could they predict it and duplicate it, but really this idea of the singularity, right? That you could download the consciousness into a mainframe, and that you could continue on that way, and being an eternal being. And of course, this idea has been presented numerous times in a number of films and sci-fi books as well. So preparing people for this idea and getting people excited about the idea that they could be merged with machine, man and machine merged together, that would make you superhuman and immortal. But as we explore, deeper into these ideas, and especially the idea of sentience, right? It knocks holes in every level of the modern scientism model, and all the way back to this idea of when you look at just the basics of quantum mechanics, right? When you begin to look at reductionism, and the idea of reductionism basically breaking things down to its smallest possible material, and this is where quantum comes from, right? The quanta, the smallest quantifiable portion. So you have these little quanta, right? So we broke it down to atoms, and then we have subatomic particles like, neurons and, or rather, protons and electrons, and so then you get into quarks, right, and keep going the Higgs boson particle and keep going lower and lower. And most of those, again, are theoretical. They just mathematically predict them and say that they've, discovered them because, and, the smaller the particle, the bigger the machine you have to get it until you get to the
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Right? It is, but exactly. It's funny how that works. That you have to have the smaller the particle, the bigger machine you have to look at it. But when you get down to it, right, it's been largely accepted since even the 1920s, early 1930s, that in the study of quantum mechanics, that materialism, actual material particles, don't really exist. They're vibrations. And that's something that, again, most philosophers all the way through history, going far back even before Plato and the Platonic solids, way before that, this idea that everything is resonance and frequency and vibration, this has been a consistent theme throughout. And yet when we try to get pushed into this hyper-materialism mode, that it's material, and this is where you get mass and gravity and all this stuff, again, when we look closely at it, it's nonsense, right? There is no physicality to it. It is actually a vibration. It appears physical. It seems physical to our perception, that the table seems solid. You can push on it. But when you look at it really closely, and this, again, when this reductionistic view, it turns out that it's really an electromagnetic phenomenon, and it has to do with polarity and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, without getting too much into the physical, the deep scientific stuff, I don't want to blow over everybody's head, but these are big topics, right? And that's really when I want to more look at the overview than really pressing too deep into it. But the idea of morphic resonance really kind of has to do with that, and that everything in the universe has this sort of resonant frequency with one another, and they influence one another to this degree. And here's a great example of this. Again, I've worked very closely with material sciences and applied physics, and largely in a tangent point with the music industry and recording and designing and building articles, and tools for recording and that sort of stuff. But one of the things that we know, for example, about waveforms, and let's say we'll take audio, for example. So audio, what you see on the screen, if you guys haven't done any recording or you see things, is what they show you as a transverse wave. That means it goes up and down, much as you would see as a alternating current, right, electricity. But that's actually not how sound travels. Sound is a transverse wave, or rather a longitudinal wave, and it goes back and forth in what's called compression and rarefaction, and it has to do with energy moving an air molecule or any media. It can travel through water or steel or anything like that. So it pushes what we would consider a molecule. It pushes it forward, and then that energy gets transferred to something else, and it moves back, and so it goes back and forth like you would think of a slinky. All right, that's called compression and rarefaction. So in that, the process as it happens moves along until it hits your ear and then it vibrates, and then you interpret that as sound. And then there's this whole philosophical question: if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it or perceive it, did it really happen? Right? But to get to the basic idea of this, what we can do is a particular frequency, like a tone on a piano. If I play a C, right, that vibrates at a particular frequency, and we always talk about 432, right, being that's the tuning for A. They changed it, right, in the 1940s? Is that right, Jason? 1940s
30s into the 40s.
Like
yeah, it started in the 30s and then got into the 40s. Yep.
Sure, and so they changed the tuning, and so way back in music in the medieval times, they actually did tempered tuning, and they had they named them by colors, right? The keys were named by colors instead of by letters. But if you take this A right here, and that's a 440 hertz, not 432, it's 440. If you go an octave, or exactly twice that frequency, 880 hertz, it's exactly an octave above. And then all the intervals in between are ratios of those, and you can express that numerically. Well, what happens is that the human ear, we can hear basically between 20 hertz or 20 vibrations per second up to about 20,000 vibrations per second. It's very wide. But what we would find when we would make audio products, right, is that when you have a wider bandwidth, let's say up to 40,000 hertz, which is well beyond the limits of human hearing, or even 100,000 hertz, when you include those frequencies, we would find that we like the sound better. What's that about, right? And so what we found is that Exactly. So it's called additive synthesis, and so they would harmonize with each other, and it would modulate those frequencies that you can hear with the frequencies that you can't hear, because they would interact with one another. And all that to get back here, this idea of morphic resonance is that the frequencies that happen all around you, right, interact with one another in such a way that they modulate and change each other. And so we can really express this idea that, again, if you have a thought, right? And not just a thought, but moreover, if you speak this thought and speak it into existence, it gives it power, and it literally interacts with the physical world around you. But even thoughts can do it. And it was a fascinating study that I saw from the early 1960s, and it happened in Sweden. There was several others since then, but there was a study in Sweden in the 1960s, early 1962, 63, where they had a group of school children, and for 6 months they had, the positive, negative, and a control. And so they had a group of school children, I think it was like 20 or 30 school kids, and they would go into this room with these plants. And every day for about an hour, the kids would go in there, and one group was to think positive thoughts and happy thoughts, and then another group was to think angry thoughts in this other group, and another group was go in there and they would just take a nap. Right, that was like their nap time. And interestingly, the positive thoughts had a profound impact on the growth of the plants. The negative thoughts actually killed a few plants and stunted their growth. And the sleep did a variety of things depending on the plant. Some of them improved slightly, some of them not so much. But it also had to do with the proximity, how close they were to the kids. And so it was one of the clearly defined studies that showed that your thought process, and the kids didn't say anything, they were to be totally silent. And it was just a thought. The power of thought alone literally affected the plant growth. And so it was a demonstrative fact. And now, of course, we can use all kinds of electromagnetic testing that we can measure these things. We can use a variety of tools, really photography, that sort of stuff, to measure the fact that your emotional state and your thoughts literally affect the world around you, the physical world around you. And so getting all the way back to the idea of this morphic resonance and how the quantum mechanics disproves the material, and especially the hyper-materialistic world, is that the physicality in a way doesn't exist. And it's not to say that everything is illusion, and you can get really deep. There's a lot of guys that really talk deeply about this. Rupert Sheldrake, he'll go away. Yes, and we were saying before the show, I really wish I had his accent, because I would sound very condescending, of course, to all of you.
Go and have a cup of tea.
Very, very intriguing. Yes, I'll have a cup of TT. But yes, anyway, these guys, many people have dedicated a lot of thought to these ideas of consciousness, and it remains to me a fascinating view. And so again, that's what we wanted to explore tonight, is some of the aspects of this, and what's been demonstrated, and what remains the most difficult problem in all of really is science, not just philosophy, but neuroscience, neurolinguistics, just about neuroplasticity, everything that deals with the mind. For example, it has long been thought, with this hyper-materialistic idea, and again, for 200 or 300 years, they've been trying to equate, and I consider it a false equivalency. They've been trying to equate the body with a machine, and therefore also the mind with a logic circuit. Right? You're just a computer.
But point out before that, they didn't see it that way. That's a more recent thing. That's when scientism started coming in.
Exactly. And that's what I was saying about what Wayne said previously, right, is that modern science has this view. But prior to that, most of history, well, again, history is we're presented, and we have to, it's a tangent point. At least we have something to go on. I don't accept the history that's been given to us. But throughout most of history, that was not the thought. The prevailing thoughts were different. It was really Descartes who really put out the Cartesian idea that again, this is a mechanical type thing. And for example, the idea that memories are stored in the brain. And when you people have tried over and over and over a countless number of times to demonstrate this, and it just doesn't hold true. You cannot prove that memories are actually held in the brain itself, which brings up all kinds of crazy questions. And then again, I'm sure we'll explore it further tonight. What happens when you dream, right? And when you begin to look at these things like evolutionary biology, again, evolutionary biology holds the idea that we decided to become a different thing, and we develop and we change over time into something better. And yet that doesn't make any sense at all in a number of different things, including irreducible complexity. But when you get to this idea of like, okay, in the movie Lucy, for example, and it's long been said that we only use 5 to 10% of our brain power. Well, why would we then evolve into having 90 to 95% more capacity than we actually use? That doesn't make any sense at all, clearly, and it just it doesn't hold. It doesn't ring true in any capacity. And again, in my view, we're in a state of devolution, not evolution. We're becoming less and less of what we once were. But again, this idea of dreaming, right, serves no evolutionary purpose. It puts the body in a state of extreme vulnerability. You spend roughly a third of your life in this state. But the things that happen and what has been viewed, again, dreams and dream interpretation, and again, many ancient cultures thought this is the place that the gods communicated to you. The idea of prophetic dreams has been long accepted again in the past. As we get closer and closer toward the modern age, when they push out this hypermaterialism idea, that they have definitely pushed this idea that anything that is not physicality, that you cannot touch, grab, smell, taste, or hear, doesn't exist. Right. And so if you believe in anything that is not material and physical, that you're retarded or schizophrenic. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They say that, prayer is when you talk to God, and psychosis is when God talks to you. Right. Which is something that my personal experience doesn't hold true. But in any case, I don't want to dominate the conversation. But this is something I'm obviously very intrigued and fascinated by. And all the evidence that we have, again, flies right in the face of the entire modern materialistic viewpoint, and everything that they try to do to research it. As I've always said, every time you answer a question, it opens up 10 more difficult questions to be answered. So,
well, let's be honest here. Everything in the modern mainstream scientific effort is to separate us more and more and more from what we really are. Everything is about how much can we smash things down and rip them apart and all that, as opposed to actually understanding the true nature of reality. I mean, even just taking spirituality, for instance, there's too much evidence that there's more to this universe that mainstream science, for the most part, still won't even accept. I mean, sure, you have some parapsychology people and things like that who want to look into things, but it's obvious to me, just like the way you described with the audio example about higher frequencies and lower frequencies that may not be captured by a sample rate, that doesn't matter. Those things are actually still there. They're important. So they should be there. It's actually why I record at 24-bit 96,000 kilohertz, because even though that's above the human hearing range, I know it is important. It is important. Those things will interact, and that's why it just sounds a little bit better. And I've even tested myself to see if I can tell the difference, especially with the more you get down with MP3s, it's lopping out so much that it should be noticeable to anybody. Then this is a good example of telling you, like, hey, you can't just start throwing things away from the universe, or else you're missing something. You're missing something important.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's the same problem with scientism.
Yeah. And just as an example of that, like Baldini was saying, he was talking about quantum science and how this kind of disproves the materialist theory when it comes down to it, the hypermaterialist theory. And here's my thoughts on it. Okay, quantum physics is misdescribed to us. And when you actually look at what it's really demonstrating to us, it's definitely a real thing. There's a real something behind it that is causing these quantum type effects and stuff and is doing this stuff. But it's not how it's described to us, because what they did is they took these ideas of frequency as such, and that everything is kind of a waveform, and they condensed it into what's called an atomist philosophy. Exactly. And they tried to quantify it by making it into particles. And this is exactly what they do. They try to squeeze these things into the materialist viewpoint. And that's exactly what all science is about right now, what this scientism is about. It's about squeezing these things and categorizing them under the strictly hyper-materialist viewpoint, the hyper-physical plane. So that's how they're looking at things. And they're not looking at these different phenomena in different ways that they should be. Instead, they're describing it as a purely physical thing. So when they're doing that, this is what they're doing. They're misdescribing it to us, and we're misunderstanding how it all really actually works. So when they're talking about quantum things, you could think of that as vibration, frequency, the things Tesla talked about.
Exactly.
That's what's really going on with that. And as far as, mind and consciousness and how that all equates to that, you could think of it that also as frequency, and we're just a tuner, like a radio tuner.
Bingo.
Our physical form actually tunes in our consciousness.
Exactly,
so
and this is the idea.
Kind of how it is. If you change the radio dial, you tune in something different, and this is kind of how it works. This is why everybody has kind of this different experience of consciousness and stuff, because we're on different bandwidths of the radio dial, pretty much. When you look at consciousness as like right.
And
so
and now you're getting
if
into
you're
the
looking
idea.
at
Well, I was going to say just real quick. Now you're getting into the idea of panpsychism, right? So don't let me forget that. Now keep going.
Yep. Oh yeah, I mean we'll touch on that later because this is all very fascinating stuff. But yeah, basically, this is what we're looking at. The human body and the human mind is a tuner for our consciousness. So our consciousness comes through, like your body could be equated to a radio, and as we age, the radio breaks down a little more, and we're not getting as sharp or crisp of a frequency as we once were. We're not tuning it in as well, so we're getting a lot of interference or static, and that's kind of why our memories start to diminish, and our capacities start to diminish, and we start to lose mental focus and sharpness. And this is why, and this is a better description of the human experience than, just say that, oh, okay, well, my brain runs all these chemicals through it, and this is what causes my memories, and, my memory is stored in the hippocampus or wherever they say your memory is stored, and this and that. And yeah, the brain is an important part of the tuning mechanism that we use, that is this radio receiver that is your body. And this is kind of a metaphor, okay? I think people are getting what I'm putting down here, though. But I view consciousness as being something external to the body, and your body is the tuner for it. And this is how we experience consciousness, is in this body, because it's, it's like a radio tuning in the frequency. And that is a much better view, I think, of how the universe really works and how consciousness really works, rather than the hyper-materialist view that they push in our science classes and stuff, where they're trying to convince you that your consciousness is nothing more than bioelectrical chemical processes going on in your nervous system, and that your whole experience as a human being is all just based on this physical meat suit. And
except that's demonstrably
that's all you are.
Sure, right. And that's demonstrably not true.
Untrue.
Right. Exactly.
And
that's the uncomfortable
that's where they
part.
Run into the problem.
Exactly, and that's why this has been described as the most heinous problem in all of science, because it's demonstrably not true, right? And every time they look more closely, it disproves all of their quote theories, right? And so this idea of morphic resonance, which again, it's just it's a fascinating thing, right? And it helps explain, right, some of these things. Like my wife is always fascinated by the fact that I can be dead asleep, and if she just stares at me, I will wake up. Right. But everybody has to some degree, I think, this experience that you can tell when someone's staring at you. Right. And even blind people know, and it's been tested, right, that if someone's staring at them and focusing on them, they will feel it. They know it. I can't remember the name of the people who did it. There was a group that did this study in the UK showing how dogs know when their owners are on the way home. Right. And they randomized the test. They did all sorts of things. And the dogs knew 20 minutes or more prior to the people showing up at home, the dogs would get excited and know their owner, their friend, was coming home. And how could they possibly know? Even when they changed plans in the middle of it and they would just randomize things, the dogs knew. Right. And this is all kind of relatable to this idea of this interconnectedness between organisms and collective memories. And even within species, right, where sometimes they've shown that pigeons and dolphins and different things know they know things from other groups that they had no connectedness with, right, other than this idea of morphic resonance. And then we get into this fascinating idea that, and again, this is something that again, I can't prove, but when I go back and look at these ancient cultures, they all had the idea that the luminaries were sentient beings. And in fact, that's why astrology is what it is, that they influenced us, not just because of their alignment, because they held influence over, it's not just the problem is not in the stars, but in ourselves, right? The fates and the stars. But this idea that the luminaries, including the sun and perhaps the moon, are sentient beings, and in fact regard us with a view, right? Interact with us in different ways. These are fascinating topics. And again, while they can't be proven, I think they certainly can't be disproven. And again, most ancient cultures had some form of this idea that the luminaries were sentient.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing to think about, because when it comes down to it, what we're talking about here, this whole morphic resonance idea, all of our consciousnesses like kind of collide together and interact. We all have this frequency, that we put out and receive. And this is how different ideas like the whole 100th monkey idea come about. Like, one doesn't have any conception of the other had this idea, and then, they come up with the same idea. This all relates to the whole consciousness idea and how it could be that these frequencies are actually interacting in different ways.
Yes, the collective consciousness.
This is where, right, and this is also the reason why we can understand the archetypes and archetypal ideas, or what they would call ancestor memory and stuff like that. Things of this nature. This is why, and this is a great explanation as to why. And in my view, it holds more water than the materialist ideas of how consciousness works.
And speaking of water, I was just going to point out that that's something I've been studying for more than 2 years now, and that again, the idea of morphic resonance holds true with water, because water shows not only memory but a kind of sentience and intelligence, and something I've been meaning to talk with Jason and Crow about on one of their shows, but I've been studying it again. It's, if you'll excuse the pun, so deep of a topic that it seems to go on endlessly. Water is a very fascinating material, and it defies most of our expectations in terms of material sciences. It does not comport to most of the laws of physics in that way. So water is a very fascinating and not only integral part of life. Most life would not exist without water. And
I think that says
the human
a lot right there.
Body is between 60 and 80% water, depending on your age and body composition. But yes, life could not exist without water and the sun. Those are two things that have to be present. So it does. Again, these are fascinating things to delve into, and almost endlessly deep. But again, at every level, the more you look into it, all of these ideas and the more questions we answer, all of them serve to disprove this hyper-materialistic viewpoint that they keep trying to push down our throats.
Well, again, I think this is to separate us from nature and all that.
Yeah, and once again, I think Jason just said this is to separate us from nature, and yes, that's totally the viewpoint I see it as too. Because,
well, let's just be honest here. Do you think the top of the pyramid, the elite of the elite, don't know that there's a spiritual and a greater side to everything, like raising their consciousness to levels that we can only fathom about? They know that shit. What do you think the secret societies are really about? And I'm talking about not the porch mason types. I'm talking about people they're really into it. They've been passing these things down definitely for hundreds of years,
untold,
possibly thousands of years. Exactly. Who knows exactly? But they've been doing this since way back when. But anyway, Wayne, that lag always messes with us.
All you have to do is observe the behavior of the quote. Yeah, I never want to call them elites, but the controllers. Much of what I know about them has to do simply with observing them. And I've said before, as crazy as some of their behaviors sound, it doesn't have anything to do with what I believe. It has everything to do with what they believe, because they do it. So all I have to do is observe how they behave and what they do, and that tells us a lot about what's going on. They absolutely believe in magic. They believe in the ether. They believe in don't hate to use the words, but a flat Earth, at least a a snow globe model, Operation Fishbowl. Hello. So they have beliefs. They believe in a creator. They believe in good and evil. They believe in a Shaitan or Satan or Lucifer. They believe in all these things. It doesn't matter in many aspects what I believe. It has to do with what they believe, because that's what that's what you're experiencing. And what you're experiencing is them turning everything upside down and them telling you everything that's real is not real. They make it as crazy as possible, and they want you to believe in everything that is illogical and crazy. Everything that they preach as being unimpeachable and settled science is crazy. If you sit down and look at it really closely, the stuff that they tell you is true is crazy, and the things that they tell you are crazy is true. It's an upside down world. It is bizarre.
Up is down, down is up, black is white, white is black. Yeah, this is exactly what it is. It's the total inversion of the natural order. That's what they're all about, and that's what they want, because they have no control or say over the natural order. But if they could create a complete artificial system within that, then they could control that artificial system and be gods of that artificial system.
Exactly.
And that's what the end game is for them. So that's exactly why they do the things they do. But when you look back just logically at the way some of these things are that we described, you described the sun and water, two essential portions to life. The sun and water also, you're talking fire and water alchemically. That represents the masculine and the feminine, the combination of these things. And this is what it's about. I mean, when you look at it from the natural science viewpoint or the alchemical science viewpoint, these things make more sense logically than the paradigm we're given, this whole materialist paradigm where they claim that the sun is this big exploding, ball of
gas,
hydrogen that's constantly fusing together, creating
in a vacuum.
It's this giant ball of gas in a vacuum that somehow burns in a vacuum. Hold on.
I know, right? It's like a device.
And that's, how is that logical in any way?
I know. I was going to say it defies every law of known physics, right? Just right there, right? And it's also 93 million miles distance, and the inverse square law is blown apart by just the light rays, right? It's just crazy. And part of me is like I get so upset with myself that I spent 40 plus years of my life just never really questioning that, right? Never really questioning that model.
That's probably the big thing with most people. They don't question these things. They just accept it because they've been told it and taught it their life from quote-unquote authority figures. These people know better than you. They're smarter than you. They have the white lab coat. They know what they're talking about. They spent years studying this stuff. You didn't. And it's been my experience, too. The more time you spend in school, the more indoctrination you have. It's not necessarily about education. This day and age, the internet, you could educate yourself. That's largely what I do. I'm pretty much self-taught on almost everything. So it just boggles the mind to think that these people, they spend years and years and thousands of dollars on this schooling, and they're so close-minded that they won't even question the things that they've been taught, even though when you take a step back from it and look at it from a logical perspective, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't stand up to common sense, and it doesn't pass scrutiny. But that's basically what they push forward, because this is what they taught, and this is what all their whole career and everything's wrapped up in, and they're dependent on that, and that's how they make their living. And it's a shame that it's that way. I've got some good friends that are like engineers and stuff, and take physics and do all of this really fascinating, interesting, quote unquote science stuff, and they're just so indoctrinated they can't see their nose in front of their face. And it's like a lot of these things are not logical when you actually take a step back from what you've been taught and question it a little further, and you see how the fallacy pops up and it all breaks down in front of your eyes. So it's one of those things. The more educated, the harder it is to break them from the indoctrination.
Yes, and I've often said, the higher the education, the deeper the indoctrination, and largely because I think that, again, we're taught to, they say respect authority, right? that you are supposed to have a default position of accepting what somebody in authority tells you and not question that. And I would say, again, since we're in an upside down world, autodidactic, right? So I consider myself an autodidactic polymath. I do have letters, right, from institutions, but
polymathery for the win.
Polymathery for the win, right? But I would suggest, again, since this upside down world, I'll just say that skepticism should be your default position, right? As we were talking with RB last week, right? The original auto hoaxer, right? So I take a position of skepticism as a default, right? So any time that the mainstream puts something out there, my position automatically, it's not necessarily hand-wave dismissal, but it certainly is a position of skepticism and being suspect of what they're telling us. And this goes, for example, with anything that you see in the media. If they're pushing a narrative, you can bet your butt that it is not true. Whether that's George Floyd, or whether that's BLM or any of these things, certainly those lives matter, but lives matter, and that's not to be, inverse or diss anybody. What I'm saying is, when they're pushing a narrative on you, then you should be suspect of that. And so anything that you see it repeated in a news cycle in 24/7, if they're pushing that narrative, you can be certain that they're trying to evoke an emotion or they're trying to push an idea, a thought, and be skeptical of it, right? So question everything.
Absolutely. We do need to question everything and get back to the sources of these ideas. And that's the whole thing. People don't always take the time to trace back an idea to its original source or its original origins. And when you do that, sometimes you find out some things that you might be utterly shocked to find out about it. So
Absolutely.
When we go ahead and we trace back some of these ideas back to like Neoplatonic philosophy and stuff like that, you're looking, this is going back thousands of years. A lot of these ideas have been around, and it's only in the more modern era where they've really pushed the hyper-materialist model of things. And this is basically where they've driven the science. This is where all the money for the science goes, and therefore this is where all the research takes place, and this is, how all of this goes on. So
exactly. And
when you want to
academia, it's publish or perish, right? So you have to toe the line.
That's the thing. Yep, and you do exactly what your benefactor wants you to do. You do the studies they want you to do. You put out the science that they want you to put out. And this is what I've discovered goes on with these scientific studies and things, especially the ones that hit these peer-reviewed journals and stuff like that. About 99 times out of 100, they're just pushing a narrative that their benefactor wants pushed with these things, and they make their conclusion before they even start the study. So they know what the conclusion is before they start the study, and they tailor the whole study into getting that conclusion that they want. And that's I've discovered this is how vaccine science works, especially, and it just kills me because I could sit and pick through a vaccine study and show you just where they manipulated the data and how they did it in order to get the result that they wanted. And it just aggravates me to no end that they call this science, because they're going in thinking, okay, this is the result I want from this study, and then they make the study to show the result. So it's not true science in that regard. This is not scientific method. This is paid for science, pretty much.
Well, it's the upside down of science again.
Hey guys, let's take a minute to define Neoplatonic for folks.
Okay, wait. You used it. You defined it.
Okay. Well, Plato was a philosopher. Okay, so basically, he put a lot of ideas down on paper. And you say a Neoplatonist is somebody that kind of explores some of those ideas and stretches them out a little further. So that's kind of what Neoplatonism is. It's
not a Neo-Satanist.
Philosophical. No, not a Neo-Satanist. That would be something totally. That's Jason.
Neoplasticine.
Yeah, I love that. But anyway, yeah, but. That's basically what it is they take these old philosophical ideas and explore them a little further and kind of science them up a little bit with more modern terminology. So that's what Neoplatonism is. So,
but the idea of peer review is designed, right? Again, with everything that they've done with the scientific method says that here's how to empirically prove something. So you go, okay, that's good. So science proves things, right? And then they flip it upside down, and then like Michio Kaku says, like nobody in my field uses the scientific method. It's all guesswork, seat of the pants, right? Wild guesses.
It's conjecture based off of conjecture.
All right. Hey, thank you, Rose. Rose says it's my first laugh of the night. It wasn't actually. I did laugh earlier. But the whole idea of, again, peer review is supposed to be that the premise is, right, that people are going to be able to duplicate and replicate the scientific process, and that's exactly the opposite of what they do. They're simply gatekeepers, so they're going to disallow anything that would go against or be contravening to the current narrative. Right, and this has been proven over and over again with, for example, archaeology, simple archaeology. Right, when you find something that doesn't go with the narrative, wow, I discovered this building and it shows that people were living here in an age that goes against the narrative. Oh no, you didn't find that. Well, yeah, I did. It's right here. Nope, you're out of work. We're going to sue you, right? And people literally have gotten sued over publishing a paper that simply described their findings. Same thing with people discovering soft tissue and dinosaur bones. Well, that can't be. Well, but it is. Here it is. I can duplicate it. Nope, you're out of work. That never worked again. Science, right? So all the peer review does is it's basically a bully society, right? We're just going to make sure that nobody gets away with saying anything we don't like. And so they've taken the whole idea of science and pushed an idea that's true. I mean, the scientific method is a very narrow system which shows a cause and effect relationship. So you can prove it, right? Demonstrable and reproducible. However, once they've got people to accept that, then they just say anything they want. Scientists say. So almost every article you'll read now will say something to the effect of, scientists believe. Well, those two words don't go together. Right? Scientists suspect. Precisely. Those things don't go together, right? If it's science, there is no belief, there is no suspect. It's proven. And so when they throw that at you, well, scientists think that. Screw that. They're lying to you. At that point, you can just throw it away. They are lying to you, right? And I showed this on the Poppycock Report with Rose 777, just yesterday, how Forbes magazine introduced in the same journal, they had one article which says at least 36 planets with intelligent life. And in the same magazine, right, they come out and say, that's the most preposterous title ever, and here's why that's a stupid idea. Right? They're creating confusion simply to get people to argue with one another. And so that they can, experts agree. Exactly. That's a great one, Steve. Whenever they tell you that, they're lying to you. I mean, just straight up. I mean, I often say that absolute certainty is the eminent domain of frauds and fools. But there are sometimes I can speak with conviction and go, it's self-evident, right? Because they're going against what we know, right? Anyway, that's where we're at with science. It's scientism. So whenever they put on the lab coat and say, scientists believe, scientists think, scientists suspect, it's bullshit. Sorry, poppycock. I'll use the proper term.
Poppycock.
Right. The other thing they don't tell you, the other thing that they don't tell you about that, too, is that not everything is measurable with scientific method. So for those things that are not measurable by scientific method, how do you prove or disprove them? And that's the thing. A lot of it's subjective. And, this is where something like consciousness comes into play. How do you
Well, that's why they dismiss it.
You really can't. Right. Precisely, because it does not fit their paradigm. Not everything fits into the scientific method paradigm. You can't measure it or quantify it. So therefore, if you can't measure it or quantify it, you can't prove or disprove it according to the scientific method.
And moreover, the scientific method is really, again, it's a very narrow definition of cause and effect relationship. For example, what we would say like the laws of thermodynamics, right? Those are the laws of physics are not within the scientific method because they express something. There's something that we can show, but we don't know why. We don't know why entropy occurs. We can describe it, we can measure it, we can predict it, but we don't know why. There's no cause and effect there. It just does. And that is the truth with most of those scientific scientific, what we call the laws of physics, right, or the laws of natural laws, those are not within the scientific method because we don't know, right? We don't know. And I often say, right, the beginning of wisdom is I don't know. And most of academia is a way to hide the fact that they don't know. Almost every abstract I've read in almost every discipline uses a huge amount of jargon and buzzwords to push people out so that you don't understand it. But when you just go back and you look pretty closely, it's not that difficult to figure out what they're saying. And ultimately, it always comes down to this in every single case. It comes down to this. In a process we don't yet fully understand, fill in the blank, right? And so all it is an attempt. They use all this big, $20 words to tell you we don't know. But then they will come right out and say, we're absolutely certain it is settled science. The debate is over. And that's bullshit, right? When they say the debate is over, that's not how science works, right? So anytime they introduce this idea that evolution is settled science, the debate is over, bullshit, then you're lying, right? Because anytime you refuse to let the questions be asked, you're lying. That's just again, that's the bottom line.
There's no such thing as settled science.
There is. That's what the laws of thermodynamics are supposed to be. But that's how few there are.
Well, that's a law, though. That's different than science, though. That's not,
It's not science.
That's not how science works.
It's not how science works, exactly. Those are observable laws, right? And so we can observe that. But there are, from time to time, things that occur outside of that we're surprised by, and we have to try to better understand those things. But we can say, again, under most circumstances, things occur in a certain way, and we can describe those things. But when they begin to tell you that the debate is over and it's settled science, that is not a thing, right? That is an oxymoron. Settled science is an oxymoron by its very definition. So again, when they say that, they are lying to you. They're saying, don't look in this box.
Absolutely. I think we kind of wandered off topic a little bit here, guys. Let's get back on the golden brick road here, the yellow brick road.
All right. Well, let's go back then to let's go back then. So we talked about understanding the etymology of things, right? The beginning of things. So let's look then at the etymology of consciousness. So generally ascribed to John Locke and his essay concerning human understanding, it came out at about 1690, and he defined consciousness as the perception of what passes in a man's own mind. And that essay really influenced most of the thinking on consciousness all the way up through the late 17 and early 1800s. But really, the earliest use of it in English of conscious and consciousness can date back to about the middle 1500s. And the English word conscious originally came from, derived again from Latin. There's that, dead language that's not. Right. So really, they conscious together and scio to know, but the strict Latin transliteration doesn't really mean the same thing because it's just talking about knowing things, right? Together knowingness, and that's not really a strict transliteration of the Latin. It's kind of a bastardization of it, but it doesn't really have that meaning, the figurative meaning that the English word consciousness does. But when we get into this idea of consciousness, conscientia, it really started in the late, again, 1600s. They started using it dealing with like moral compass, right? But the whole idea really comes, again, in the strict dictionary definition, the awareness or perception of the inward psychological or spiritual fact, right? And that's the textbook definition, spiritual facts. Intuitively perceived knowledge of something in one's own self, an inward awareness of an external object, state, or fact. Concerning awareness, the interest or concern, often used with an attributive noun, the state or activity that is characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, or thought. The mind is the broadest possible sense, something in nature. And here's a thought to think of, right? The word animal, right, comes from anima, which means spirit. And yet, here's an interesting one. Animal basically means without spirit, right? These don't have a soul. Right. These beings, they don't have a soul. They're moving, but no soul for them. Again,
I disagree.
Demonstrably not true. So this is where, again, they've been pushing these ideas on us for a very long time, flipping the world upside down. Bamboozled from birth is absolutely right, Amanda. So it's the totality in psychology of the sensation, perceptions, ideas, attitudes, feelings, right? This is all considered consciousness. And consciousness, again, when we get back to this idea, what we're told to believe it is, as Wayne said earlier, simply a byproduct of the electrochemical functions that happen in the synapses of your brain between the neurons and axons, this little electrical jump, and that's the center of it. But again, when you look closely, for example, there are more neurotransmitters in your thorax than there are between the brain and the rest of the body. Right? And so when you get that gut feeling, that's true. And this, again, extends to a range of about a meter, about 3 feet around you, and you interact with everything else around you. So now you know why they want you 6 feet apart, so you don't interact with other people, because you have that interaction with them. And
wait, there's an ulterior motive to social distancing?
Yes,
really?
Really? And that's a very important point right there that you make too. That's that's key. That is key with the whole social distancing idea. They don't want our morphic fields to interact, because if they don't, we lose a form of communication with one another. And this is kind of something similar to like a telepathy type idea. Okay, if you're looking at like an archetypal idea. And this is the thing: a human consciousness interacts with other human consciousnesses. So, it's one of those things where proximity to people, if you're close to somebody for a long time, you kind of pick up some of their same habits. And,
entrainment happens, and you can, again, this is demonstrable that your
That's
heartbeat.
That's what it's called, entrainment.
Entrainment, exactly. And your heartbeat will actually begin to become entrained or begin to beat at a similar rate to the other person, and you begin to get in harmony with them, right? And in fact, while we can put all this stuff in the brain, right, we put the center of our thought in the brain. Remember that we often say the center of the emotions is the heart. You've captured my heart, right? I'm heartbroken, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Encouragement literally means take heart, right? But what happens is, so the heart has a stronger electromagnetic field by 60 times than the brain, and it really is measurable, again. And so by keeping people apart from one another, to me, it's an inhuman thing. I first mentioned this on Iron Realm Media a few weeks back, right, when we were discussing this. And since the idea has been picked up on by a number of different people, and I'm delighted about it, right? Even Matt from Quantum of Conscience spoke about it the other day, how people are starting to realize the truth of this, that by keeping people distanced from one another, they are making us inhuman, right? And we now don't have compassion from one another. I see this now daily, that people are really rude to one another, and in part because they're losing their compassion and their humanity by virtue of being separated, and they're fearful of one another, right? They're afraid of this virus, or you're gonna infect me.
Oh my God, he didn't have a mask on.
It's inhuman, and it's unconscionable to me. I mean, it is. It's a terrible thing that they're doing, but this is even though again we talk about proximity, this idea of morphic resonance, it defies proximity. There have been, I'm sure everybody that's listening has had the experience where you think about somebody, and within minutes sometimes they will call you. Right, and especially even people you haven't talked to in weeks or years, you'll think about them, and suddenly they'll call, or you'll get an email from them. Right, these things, people want to just cast them off as sheer coincidence, but when it happens to you a number of times, and the number of people who've had this experience, it's obviously greater than statistically significant. This is a real phenomenon.
It is a real phenomenon for sure. And our modern-day quantum science tries to describe this as either quantum entanglement or quantum non-locality. But this is a much better explanation of that phenomena, right? That's the thing. I mean, when they bring you these sciences and they tell you, oh, quantum theory, quantum this, quantum that, they're describing actual things to you, but it's being misdescribed. It's being twisted to the materialist view, when there are other alternative explanations to the phenomena that make more sense. And this morphic field bit, morphic resonance, this makes more sense. I mean, this is logical. It explains a lot of different things, and it does defy distance and stuff like that. That's like how the three of us, we really jive well together, because even though we're at thousands of miles apart, but Baldini and I, our periods still kind of coincide with one another. So,
Yep. we get on our menstrual cycle together.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's true. So it's one of those things where it just, even though that we have this distance, we still kind of have this, this camaraderie or whatever, that our morphic fields kind of interact with one another.
They enmesh. Yeah, we get entrainment, and we start thinking about the same thoughts. And in fact, this is how kind of Wayne and I started doing the Sola Scriptura stream on my channel on Sunday mornings, and that's the Unintended Consequences channel. We're doing it Sunday mornings at 7 a.m. Pacific and 10 a.m. Eastern time, beginning to look at these things, because we kind of got into. Yeah, right. Exactly. But we got it. We started getting in cahoots, I guess, with one another, and started thinking these same thoughts. And again, we're not the only ones this has happened to, right? Like, the history is littered with people who have done amazing inventions about the same time without any interconnection with each other. They both solved a problem, a mathematical or physical problem, at the same time, separated by, again, across the world before there was instant communication. And the history is littered with those, and also the number of people who have solved problems in a dream. Right, they wake up. The story is told of the guy who invented the electric sewing machine, or at least the mechanical sewing machine. And he was trying to figure out how to do it, and he struggled. And I think he spent 4 or 5 years working on the problem, and then finally. He had a dream, and in his dream, he was on an island, right, with cannibals, and the natives were poking at him with spears, and in the spears' tips, there was a hole in the end of the tip. And he suddenly woke up and went, "Holy shit, that's the answer," right? Because before that, if you look at manual sewing needles and thread, the hole, the eyelet, is at the back of the needle, and you couldn't do that with a machine. He was having all kinds of problems doing it, and so then we put the eyelet at the tip of the needle in a sewing machine. It worked, and so he solved the problem in a dream. And he always said to the day he died that it came to him in a dream. He's not the only one that's had that experience. So again, we look at these things and go, what is going on here, right? This idea of cosmic consciousness, collective consciousness, shared memories in some cases. Is this what, the idea of past lives is? Could it be memories bouncing? These are fascinating topics that people have spent all lifetimes looking into, and again, there's no way we can cover it all here, even some of the concepts. But you certainly can start looking into it and looking into some of these ideas and some of the people that have approached this. Again, I highly encourage that you can get off into some really interesting tangents this way.
No doubt about it.
Crickets.
A lot of interesting tangents.
No, Wayne's got a lag.
You had finished your thought.
There's a big problem that Wayne always seems to be about a second or two behind, which is why I always pause up for a moment.
Yes, the infamous lag. That would be thanks to my wonderful internet service provider, Frontier.
Exactly.
So, it's a small price to pay for being.
You know how to treat a girl right.
Yeah. Well, it's a small price to pay for living out in the country away from most of society. So I'll take my chances with it, I guess. It's all I got out here.
But even if it were perfect internet connection, right? This is one of the reasons why I've been struggling with this idea of why we can't, collaborate musically in real time, is because even at the speed of light, even if there were no delay in the machine, because we're so far apart, right? So let's say between Wayne and I, there's 2,400 miles, and if you start to do the math on it, even at the speed of light, perfect speed of light, there would be about 65 to 70 millisecond delay. Exactly, way too much. And when you duplex that, now we're talking 120 milliseconds. It would be a separate sound altogether. So there's no way to do it, even if the hardware had no delay in it, which it does.
That's slapback echo at that point.
Even if I had some musical talent whatsoever, too, that would be
right. I mean, when when Wayne broke up from his surgery, he said, will I ever, play piano again? And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, well, I didn't before. So, it's a joke. So there is this distance between us, right? So we do have a little bit of lag, not only in the audio, but interestingly enough, Wayne and I get the same thoughts at the same time, and we start talking over each other. I see in the chat, people are like, shut up, Baldini, let Wayne talk. I'm like, I know, man, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, that goes back to the pesky lag problem, though. So, most of that, when you hear us talking over each other, it's not because we're ignorant to each other or anything. It's just because, there's this, it's about maybe, what would you say, Jason? Maybe like a 2-second delay or something?
It seems like about 2 seconds, yeah. That's why I always pause for a moment.
Yeah, it's usually a good thing, but when Baldini's on his soapbox, sometimes it's hard to get a word in edgewise anyway.
Oh, I know.
When I do start talking, though, it's not that I'm talking over him on purpose, but that's the way it goes. But we have fun with it anyway. We'll make it work.
We just take bets of how much time Wayne actually gets in, and he's got to poke me pretty hard. I'm going to put one of those like electric shock collars on me, and then you'll be able to push the button. Give me the controller. I was going to give it to Wayne.
You're better off to give it to Jason, because I'm much too kind with those things.
Yeah. Okay, so back to consciousness. So again, we get this idea of again, what is consciousness, and the whole thing comes to this. It's often been called the mind-body problem, right? Is that again, it's been largely accepted within modern science that the brain is the computer and it's causing the body to function, as I mentioned a moment ago. But we've got all these neuroreceptors in the gut, right, in the thorax, and then they're both sending and receiving information out into the field, the morphic resonance field, if you will, the ether, and we get a sense about what's happening out there. And again, you can tell if somebody's the sense that somebody's watching you, right? The hair stands up in the back of your neck. You can actually tell these things. And so, again, it was largely, early kind of modern science, Descartes, that looked at it, right? And he had what he called Cartesian dualism, but he's still, again, trying to describe the body as a mechanical function and the brain sort of as its logic center, the computer. And again, the more we look at it, the more we realize, although that was accepted and it fit within their ideas of logic, it doesn't actually work that way. And so it becomes very fascinating that the deeper we look at these problems, the more we realize that quote, modern science is further away than ancient philosophy. Ancient philosophy had a much closer and I think more accurate look at not only these questions, but in fact many of them, including cosmology. But again, I mentioned the luminaries again as being sentient beings. Keep in mind that all the planets, if you want to call them that, they all have names of gods to this day, except Pluto.
That they do.
Right? That's the Disney dog.
Pluto's my cat.
So, yeah. And again, I think anybody who's dealt with any kind of astrology at all would agree that there is a there, right, to the influence of the stars and their relative position to us. So whatever you want to think about it, and if you want to get scared and go, "It's from the devil, hallelujah," like our friend who thinks that Jason's velvet jacket makes him a Satanist, whatever. Again, there is a there, and to my view, it is this interconnectedness of all things. And if you want to call it morphic resonance or however you want to name it, my observation says that these things definitely have truth to them. Can I describe it fully? No, but can I observe that it happens? Yes.
And that's the thing. That's where it comes down. It's observable, so that is one of the key tenets of scientific method. First of all, is it observable? Is it repeatable?
Right.
And is it measurable? Those are like your three main tenets of scientific method. We could definitely observe this phenomenon. Can we measure it? To some degree, we can by doing the right kinds of experiments. And can we repeat those experiments? Well, yes, we can. So like that's where we could see. Like something with an experiment you could do really easily is if you stare at somebody's back, from a distance away, they'll feel like they're being looked at and they'll turn around and look at you. And you could measure this, and experiments have been done and have been shown to have some, statistical significance to, people will realize when they're being stared at. Right.
Much greater than statistical significance. It's shown. And then this is where we get to the
that way.
Yeah. So, and this is where we get to the idea of, then you add the idea of the problem of other minds, right? And this is a conversation that Red Fox and I had on my channel last week, which is, he's asking the question about consciousness and experience, right? And perception, and how do we perceive these things? And are we having the same perception? Is there a materialness to it, right? So he's like, well, okay, so we both look at a tree. Are we both, do we agree it's a tree? Is it a physical thing? And I said, well, we experience in a similar way that we can describe things that would be similar to such that we both agree that we're seeing it. However, we may both experience it very differently, right? And then is there a right or wrong there? Not really. We're both experiencing what we experience. But to a large degree, I think here's a phenomena that we can very clearly see now, and I've had several discussions with a number of people with, as we observe those who are fully locked in, we would say the blue pill folks, they experience the world in a markedly different way than do those of us on this side of the red pill, right? In that they seem to literally see things in that way, and again, I think it's provable that they do, and the limbic system is one of the ways that they do that, because it will actually change the way they perceive information based on what they believe. And that's been proven. So we are experiencing the world as material as it seems. We're experiencing it in sometimes radically different ways, and often determined by our perspective to begin with. And whatever your beliefs are, that's going to make concrete your views. And so it can be said that in many ways, belief is the enemy of knowing, in that it makes concrete what you already believe. And so there is no way for you to learn anything more, because your brain will literally change the incoming data to comport with what you already believe. So there's no way you can learn anything new. And that's the saddest thing to me ever. That's an indicative of death.
Right. But are you also implying in your statement, though, that our thoughts affect our reality?
Absolutely.
See, there's the other side of the coin.
Well, we should probably talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, you're right, Jason. We should talk about that. Our thoughts affect our reality. And,
I mentioned it before in that study, right? In the study in Sweden in the 60s, that it's been shown that not only do your thoughts affect it, but they manifest it. And to me,
precisely.
Again, and this is something that you would, again, Wayne and I talked about on the first episode of Sola Scriptura, right? Is that in my view, this realm was made to manifest our intentions, right? If you want to call that magic or whatever, but it was made to manifest our intentions at the outset. That's the way the Creator designed it. When he made us, gave us dominion over this place, it was made to manifest our thoughts. And so long as those thoughts are in compliance with the order of nature and natural law, they should manifest. But when you got these controllers who are turning things upside down, they have these, when go back to the idea of waveform, when you add different waves together of different frequencies, when they come into contact, they can do what's either additive, right, or constructive interference, or they can do destructive interference. And so if we want to use sound as an example again, low frequency sounds, bass, if you want to call it that, they're very long, very energetic sound waves, and they take a lot of energy to produce. In fact, on a full range amplifier, about 80% of the energy is taken up by sounds under 200 hertz, that is the low frequencies. But these long frequencies, they can build up in corners of a room because they're so big and so long. But you can get in a room, you can find what are called nodes, right? And these nodes exist where those frequencies will come into contact with each other, the low frequency, and you can easily walk around a room and tell, because sometimes they will interact with each other in a positive way and make the bass really loud. And in other places, they'll cancel each other out and there's no bass at all, right? And so when you set up big sound systems for concerts and that sort of thing, these are things that sound engineers have to be aware of, because you don't want to put your subwoofers, for example, in a place that you're going to get these nodes developed, because you could have a third of the audience literally getting no bass and a third of the audience with the brown note, and they're crapping themselves right uncontrollably because they're having so much low frequency energy. These things are again apparent and observable in nature, and we can use, for example, sound to do it. You can do the same thing with light. You get constructive and destructive interference. This is how holograms work. work, that you're using the ability of rays of light, and you're using them in a constructive manner to give the illusion of 3 dimensions with a 2-dimensional object. It's not, again, outside the realm of, it shouldn't put you into woo land to consider the idea that electromagnetic frequencies, just things outside of our ability to see or hear or taste, but they are still there, they're measurable, that we interact with each other in these ways, and not just within proximity, but over very large fields. And the entire Earth resonates at what's called the Schumann resonance, right? So the whole Earth, as we know it, has a vibrational field, and not just the electromagnetic, but the whole thing vibrates. And so when we get into contact with this, right, it's very similar to the brain waves that we can again measure, and then we have the alpha and theta and beta waves that we use to process information. We should be in close communion with nature around us, and yet everything that the controllers have done, certainly for the last 300 to 400 or 500 years, has been to literally take us as far away from the natural world as possible. I mean, consider the modern human, that everything he does is to separate him from the natural world as far as possible. He wears shoes, clothes, concrete. He never gets his feet or fingers in the soil, stays out of the sun, uses sunblock and sunscreen and sunglasses, and stays inside. The city keeps us as far away from the natural world. I have met people in my lifetime who literally are freaked out by animals, right? Even domestic, like dogs and cats, they freak out. They're afraid of them, and especially larger animals like cows and things like that, because they've never experienced it, and it freaks them out. And it breaks my heart. I mean, I don't even know, right? They're so again, entrained with the electromechanical world, this artificial world, that they are uncomfortable in nature, and that's what I think the controllers have intended for a very long time.
So, referencing back to consciousness and mass consciousness, and how things that you put forth into the universe, you're trying to make manifest. I think that is what magic truly is. And
sure.
I know I've discussed this before. Maybe, I don't remember if it was here or not, but I think that's what magic truly is. And a lot of the other stuff is window dressing to a point, but it's also sometimes helpful in achieving the desired emotional responses and all that, because a lot of it is tied to emotion. You're literally taking the energy of yourself, and the more people that are focusing on a particular point of intent, the more powerful the thing could possibly be. And I would say that nobody knows this more than the controlling bad guys of this world. They absolutely know what this stuff is, hence why we see their bullshit symbols everywhere and all their crap like orc scrawl on everything. They know what they're doing, man. There's intent behind all that, and again, this is all coming back to consciousness.
It does seem as well in every ancient tradition, both religious and, I don't want to say pagan or, just like in every spiritual tradition, let's put it that way. Blood is a powerful component. Again, even within the Christian tradition, to go back to the animal sacrifice of the ancient Israelites. So blood appears to be a very powerful thing. Even again, the first murder is described in the book of Genesis, where Cain killed his brother Abel, and God showed up and said, his blood cries out to me from the ground. Right. So the idea of blood being a powerful component in these magical things, as well as intent and will, certainly seems to be, again, there's something to it. And we see, again, this reflected in the behavior of the controllers. Again, it doesn't matter what we three think, other than we can observe what they're doing and saying.
Right.
They believe it.
And I would conjecture that maybe your blood is the whole key to consciousness and the tuning of your physical form with the consciousness,
or your antenna,
right? I think
there's iron in it, right?
Right.
So
I think blood plays an important role in that, because when you look back at just the philosophical and religious history of the blood, and how the blood is the life. And, you look back in that biblical story of Cain and Abel, Abel's blood cried out to God from the ground. So that tells me it's transmitting, or you know what I mean? So
exactly.
That's the whole thing. So I think that may be a whole key to what could be the physical manifestation of consciousness in our human forms, in our
in
physical,
some way.
In some way or another.
Take a look too, Wayne, at the Holy Grail, sangreal, sanguine, blood,
right?
Right. Right. So now we're really getting into it, and we talked then about bloodlines. So when we're talking about interbreeding, they don't say spermatozoal lines or even genetic lines. We talk bloodlines.
Bloodlines, right? There's a certain key there that goes along with consciousness and blood. There's definitely a tie or a connection there between the two, and that's something that I think most people kind of miss the boat on. But it's something that does, merit some more discussion or more study. So, it's one of those things where that could be one of the key components in this physical realm of our consciousness is our blood. And thus the importance of bloodlines and quote-unquote pure bloodlines and things like that to kind of tune the frequency better for us, for our tuner. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to describe, but like if you're looking at it as the metaphor of like your human body is like a radio tuner, and your spirit or your soul is the radio station that your tuner is tuning in. So, when you look at it from that perspective, it's a good metaphor for what I think consciousness really is about, or how it operates in some sense. So, looking at it from that perspective, I think that's a bit more of a logical explanation of it than the materialist view we're given. So that's why they missed the boat on so many things with mainstream science, and that's why we never seem to get any closer to really solving the puzzle of what is life, what is consciousness, what is this stuff. And it is the big problem of science is, consciousness flies in the face of everything this materialist science is trying to teach us about this world we live in, because not everything is a mechanized structure. It's not a machine. The human body is not a machine. The human mind is not a machine. Though they try to quantify it and measure it as such and describe it as such, they're trying to shove the idea of consciousness into the materialist paradigm, and it just doesn't.
It doesn't go.
But still, But still, they will do everything they can to stuff it down and silence anybody that questions the whole motif. So that's kind of what we're looking at with this stuff. Is they're trying to squeeze it into this paradigm that it really doesn't fit into, but they're trying to force it. And you see when you start looking at things like transhumanism and artificial intelligence and all of those things, you could see how they're trying to force it more and more.
Absolutely, and without trying to beat the dead horse or unnecessarily flog a mortality-challenged equine-American, the more PC way to put that. Again, from my perspective, there are those who know, right, the controllers, and then they've taught everyone else to dismiss it, right? So it's not that we're necessarily getting further and further. I mean, they're pushing us further and further away, but it's not as if they don't know, right? And because they clearly practice this, again, with the idea of blood, that they drink blood. They're openly saying now that they're transfusing young people's blood to keep themselves young, and they're not even keeping it a secret anymore. So they're doing this idea of adrenochrome, that it's adrenaline infused into the blood of those who are tortured and sacrificed. Against an ugly topic, and don't want to dwell too much on it other than to say it's these ideas are out there, but with these ideas of then blood and consciousness, right? So let's push a little further, and without trying to get too woo here, right? So certainly we have animal consciousness, as I mentioned before, the idea of animus, right, and the soul, and animal, that it has none, but it's alive and animated. These all have the same root word, same etymology. So we can clearly say that there's these ideas of animal consciousness. But now we get into this concept, again, with many ancient cultures, of artifact consciousness and totems, for example, that you could take an artifact and it could be made conscious by infusing it by the will, right, or with blood, or different means and methodologies, usually some sort of ritual that could make an artifact conscious to a certain degree, and then even moving forward to contributions on this question in 1950, right? Alan Turing, in Computing Machinery and Intelligence, this whole idea of the Turing test of making, I mean, he's basing it on this idea, literally, of artifact consciousness, to create consciousness from a machine. So it comes back to this very idea of taking an inanimate object, right, and making it conscious. However, I'll tell you just the brief story about a time that I was managing a band way back in the day. I managed a record label, took a band on tour. We stopped for a concert in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was given an artifact to take to a guy who had a paleontological museum, a geological paleontological museum. It was basically a piece of petrified, supposedly dinosaur poop. It was definitely petrified poop of some kind, a big round turd with a little, ice cream top on it.
Dude, you got the best stories.
Oh well, even that, but I know, but and some of them are even, are even clean. No, but so I had to take this poop to this guy, and it was so after the festival that was with this band, I went with my girlfriend at the time, and we dropped it off, and his place was closed. It was Sunday, but he let us in. It was this old guy, and he asked if we wanted a tour, and I said sure, right. And I'd never really been much of a rock hound. I was intrigued by it when I was a kid, and my dad bought me a rock polishing set, and I tried to get into it, but it just took so long. I didn't have the attention span as a kid. But he started taking us through this place, and I was first impressed by his passion for it, right? And again, he was quite old, and he was an octogenarian. And as he's taking us through, he then starts describing the way that rocks are formed, the different types of rock, and then into crystals, the idea. And he started really into this idea of crystals being intelligently formed. They're self-organizing systems, much as organisms are, living organisms. And he had me pretty well, I'd say, convinced. By the time we got through this thing, and he was showing me how they responded and reacted in different ways, but they're on a time scale that's very different than ours. So most people would not notice the fact that these rocks are literally responding in an intelligent manner to the world around them, to such a degree that they show, again, intelligence. And many of them, I would say, sing. They vibrate at a frequency that when you change that frequency, by using electronic means, you can hear it, and they sing in a harmonizing way. And it changes when you walk into its proximity, so it knows you're there. Right, here we go back to morphic resonance. Some of them, again, emit colors. Some of them we can see just visually, and some of them you need ultraviolet or infrared light to see. But he had me pretty well convinced at the end of that that rocks may in fact be sentient, but on a geologic time scale, it's so different than ours that their lifespan would be, we would think of them as immortal, and we would be to them, very transient. But fascinating stuff, right? And I can't, I can't dismiss it when I start looking really at the nature of crystals and the way that we interact with them. And a lot of people are really into the crystal stuff. Again, I don't mean to say that in mocking, but some people get into the. They are pretty woo. But in any case, but crystals do seem to have an effect on us in a variety of ways. It's not something I'm an expert on, other than again the material sciences aspect of it is fascinating, and all of these things lead me to believe that there is that consciousness is something. Again, well, I can say this for a fact, that we don't understand what it is, right? For sure, and there are many arguments and theories on it, all in a variety of different ways. But ultimately, we don't really know what it is. But it is all around us. We can demonstrate it. We can experience it. We're all experiencing consciousness. We experience this world in a way that is similar to one another, but decidedly different. We can demonstrate that. We have dreams that in which we sometimes are a different character, right, or in a different place in a world. Sometimes it seems very real to us. So, and some of us even have had the experience of where two people are occupying the same dream, and that's a pretty weird one. So again, what do I make of this stuff? Man, I don't know, right? I know for sure I don't know, but it is fascinating. But to me, it certainly does lead us in ways that is very contrary to the mainstream narrative we're given at every level.
Perhaps it's fair to mention piezo crystals, just to give an example of how things interact in this universe.
Precisely. And that's a perfect segue right into the next point that we need to make here, and that's panpsychism.
Exactly.
If you want to describe what that is. Yeah. Baldini, you want to go ahead and define panpsychism for everybody?
Well, really, when you get down to it. So, again, Rupert's Resonance, right, and then of course, Sheldrake is really, he really pushes this idea that goes from morphic resonance to panpsychism, right, and that everything is in contact with one another, right? That there is again a universal consciousness, and to some degree, I mean, it's been posited that the universe is God, and that all. In fact, at one point, when I still believed in the universal model as presented, that with galaxies and that sort of thing, right? That it seemed to me to be like a holographic view of one another. That it looked very much like what we were presented with the idea of an atom, and that you've got like a mini solar system, and it's scaled up, and you see similar things within organic structures. And so, I thought it was. Possible that all of what we observed in the universe, when I considered it, an infinite universe with galaxies and star clusters and that sort of thing, could be, for example, like the molecules of God, right? That it's this giant being, and so it really these ideas that push this idea, that everything is everything, right? So
everything is conscious and everything's everything is conscious and everything's interconnected. So that's basically the whole idea of panpsychism. Even what we would consider non-living things, natural non-living things, everything. Yes. But this is the important part. All natural things, anything that kind of self-assemble or self-create or
self-organizing systems.
Self-organizing systems.
I think that's the definition that they use, is that any self-organizing system is a natural system, and exhibits these same characteristics of sentience, right? So whether it is rocks or water or plants or animals, at every level. The idea that we are everything, mentality is fundamental, it's ubiquitous within the natural world, it is everywhere, and that everything that is material in a natural way in a self-organizing system is demonstrating a level of sentience and consciousness, and that it is, by extension, all connected and part of the same thing. Right, and this goes, I think, directly to the idea of karma, that you cannot do anything that is not connected to everything and yourself. And this idea, that you cast your bread upon the waters, and in many days it comes back. Right, that when you throw a rock into the water and you see those ripples go out, they come out, but when they hit the edge, they come back. Right, and they form again these various structures that are constructive and destructive. In the same way, we see this in all waveforms. And so, to me, the idea that that we have waveforms, we have energy, vibration. It is not a material thing, but it is all energy and energetic vibration, and we're interacting with each other in a way that is conscious, but that we are unconscious of or unaware of, that we do not perceive it, largely because we've been told not to. And again, I think if we look back at the ancient cultures, they were far more aware of the nature of this than we are now. And we've been taught to poo-poo everything the ancients said is because they were knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who didn't know their ass from a hole in the ground, and they were so dumb they thought the earth was flat.
Yeah, and see that there's an important concept people could really derive from all that. That is that everything within nature is conscious, and it's all interconnected. It is kind of like the consciousness of God. It's all tied together through some unseen sort of medium that we have trouble describing. I would describe it as ether. I mean, that's how I would describe it, as the ether. We're all connected through this ether, this immaterial thing that we can't measure nor see or even prove that it's there per se in conventional terms here physically. But all this stuff is all interconnected, and here's the key though. Everything that's created within nature, all self-organizing systems created in nature or naturally, have this sort of consciousness to it. Now, I do see, that there are nanotechnologies and stuff that do this self-assembly and self-organization and stuff like that. But these are man-made things that will break down over time. These are not going to go on ad nauseum forever, much like the natural order would do should we just leave well enough alone with it. Like the Earth will always self-correct. Like we've seen this time and again. If there's a city or something and it's abandoned, well, guess what? Everything grows up and around it and completely covers over what used to be there, and it's gone.
Exactly. Go back. Go look at Chernobyl right now. Right? How quickly that has been taken back by nature, right?
Precisely.
And I mean, you can go back to Diogenes, who says that the universe is alive and full of spirits, right? And that even goes back further to Aristotle, right? Who says basically some say a soul is mingled in the whole universe, right? Again, this idea of panpsychism. That there's this ubiquity of animation, that everything is alive and conscious, even those things that seem not to be. Again, if we wanted to look at mineral things, rocks and mountains, that sort of thing. And again, most ancient cultures considered the idea that the trees had consciousness, right? That wood nymphs and these kind of things come from those mythos. But again, I can't disprove it. And when I get out in nature and I get a sense of it, it does feel as though the nature is watching me, right? That I am a part of it. And again, I come to this idea that it seems from my observation that everything the controllers have been doing for the last 300 plus years has been to put into man the idea that somehow we are ascendant by removing ourselves from nature and that we become above it. And it's a sort of apotheosis to separate ourselves from nature. And it couldn't be, again, that couldn't be more untrue. The opposite is true, that we are only who we are when we're within the midst of, the universal consciousness, that we cannot truly be who we are, and we are separated from ourselves, if you will, when we separate ourselves from nature and from each other. And again, going back to this idea of what this current social distancing nightmare is about, is to separate you from this morphic resonance field of other people so that you are unable to communicate with them, and especially covering their face, because again, you cannot see their micro expressions. You cannot see them smiling or even speaking. You are now cut off from them, and you become so alone. And again, this has been proven over and over that this kind of isolation will make you crazy. It will affect your consciousness and your mindset and your emotions, because we need those connections. And so it will literally make you crazy. They are trying to harm people, and it's a very difficult proposition for me to look at these days. And I see the results of it. But yeah, okay. So back to the idea of panpsychism. Yes, that everything is alive and universally conscious, and to take it one step further, that is. That altogether, the summation of these things creates purpose, right? That is the purpose, is to understand that there is a will, right, that overrides and overarches all these things that the universe knows. And if you again separate yourself from it, you are separate from it and cannot complete your purpose.
Right, and just to point this in another direction now, going back to what you said at the start of the show, whereas if you look at it from the perspective that all of nature is conscious in one way, shape, or form, well, then by extension, the sun, the moon, the other luminaries also have some form of consciousness too, because they are natural self-organizing systems. So when you look at it from that perspective, it causes, some interesting thoughts, interesting
questions.
you could do.
Yes,
right, and it brings up some interesting questions. But so, when you look at it, is there a way we could prove that? No, probably not. But
maybe, because it all comes back to waveform. The entire universe, in my opinion, based off of observation and experimentation to some degree, it's all waveforms. Everything is waveforms.
Be careful when you use experimentation. There's some guys that'll get after you on that. I'm not going to mention names, but some people they only want to hear about scientific experimentation.
I was thinking more like along the lines of meditation and all that.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I understand what you're saying. I think that some of those people who do that are short-sighted, because I could say I experimented with drugs. It's not a scientific experiment. I experimented in the kitchen. I experimented in the bedroom, right? Suddenly you're a libertine. No, sorry, I'm not going to make those kind of jokes. But no, you're absolutely right that I think it's measurable. I think, can you prove it? I think proving some of the conclusions would be difficult, but can you prove aspects of it? Absolutely. We can measure, we can demonstrate the electromagnetic fields. We can measure certain aspects of what we would say this morphic resonance. We can measure certain things, describing how it interacts with one another. That's the more difficult process, is to show a hypothesis and a direct cause and effect relationship, and that would be a difficult proposition. But certainly, again, as Wayne says, the questions that it brings up are profound and fascinating, and this is why, again, we suggested this at the top of being such an interesting topic, is because these are the questions, these are the foundational questions that have led to all of what we now know as the multidisciplinary aspects of science altogether, is to try to answer these questions. And to me, that's the most, I suppose, even ironic bit, is that while this is the foundational question, and ultimately you get to a why, none of those questions can be answered. And when you have all of the research that's been done over these millennia, and we think we know so much, this question still is the most difficult one to answer and has remained unanswered. And in fact, the closer we would come to answering it, as we said at the top of the show, the more it disproves hypermaterialism and what scientism is now, which is just, I think, it would be hilarious if it weren't so frightening and sad.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, indeed, and that's the thing. You just gotta wonder, how did we as a society go so far astray from what could be accepted as these true natural things, these true natural sciences and stuff? How did we veer so far? And
we were taught to respect authority, and then authority told us lies. Right?
Precisely. Those people that put themselves in the position of authority, they held sway over us by, first of all, using the tool of secrecy to keep secret knowledge from us, to keep these ideas and stuff from us, and hold sway over us with that. And that's still one of the biggest tools that these people use today, secrecy. And
let's put this cap on it, right? The very word occult means to hide. It's hidden. Mm-hmm. And so we say, okay, it's hidden, and then they reinterpret the word occult to mean evil, evil, wickedness, hallelujah. Could it be Satan? And so anything occult suddenly is, satanic. So don't look there, or you're going to burn in hell, right? And so this creates again a great way to hide something in plain sight, is to say, okay, it's occult, it's hidden, we're going to hide it, and where are we going to hide it? Behind Satan. Right, don't look there, right? And yet, when you tell a kid, don't look in the box, the first thing they're going to do is look in the box, right? But when you make it scary, right, and you put the boogeyman on top of it, that's going to, and then tell you your eternal soul is going to be damned if you go looking in that box. That changes the game a little bit. So again, just by redefining the word occult, they've made it scary, right? So we're afraid to look at the truth.
And they do that with so many things. They redefine words and terms all the time, and you can see it's the whole language game again. The words have meaning game.
Yep. Just like anarchists, right?
Right. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. They just twist and pervert the meanings of these words and terms, and they even names and stuff, like they just twist everything all around and turn it into something that it was never really originally intended to be. Exactly. And they do that all the time, even with ideas and stuff too that we have. So it's really kind of disturbing when you look at it, the way they twist things around and rewrite history and stuff like that with these different ideas in mind, and knowing full well that they're keeping some kind of knowledge from us, and only a select few people are going to be privy to that knowledge, and that's how they maintain control to one degree
throughout
or
the
another.
millennia. Yeah, throughout the millennia, these secret societies, right, in the mystery schools, and intentionally.
I think that's why they started in the first place.
Exactly. Yep. And to them, again, and this is one of the fascinating pieces of psychology that I see, right, is that they get people to believe that they're doing a virtuous thing by ultimately harming others. By keeping information from others, they're keeping it from the profane people who would misuse it. And in fact, but where in fact they are the ones who are misusing it. And so, again, it's a fascinating thing that people, by again, teaching the willing student lies, and then he repeats them, and he is sincere but sincerely mistaken. And so this is ultimately leads to the answer when you start revealing lies to people, and they're like, but why would they lie? You mean my teacher was a liar? Well, your teacher wasn't lying to you, but they were told a lie. And so all they could do is repeat the lie. That's all they could do, right? And so only those in the position to know. But everybody else is sincere, but sincerely mistaken. But it's up to you. But they also teach you, again, to respect your elders. Well, it's a good thing, but to respect authority. And then they hand out authority only to those who are in on the game. Or again, willing participants, then they simply want to be patted on the head and told that they're doing a good job. How do you do that? By telling, again, repeating, parroting, regurgitating what these controllers say, and that's how they get the cheese, and everybody wants to get their cheese.
Right, and they do this in a lot of subtle ways, and they like to use people's good intentions against them. A perfect example of this just happened today. Well, guess what? Aunt Jemima is not going to be anymore. There's not going to be a name brand Aunt Jemima pancakes or syrup or anything like that anymore, because somebody got offended. Right. So they took people's good intentions, and now they're going to eliminate this product and the history of this product from existence. So now people won't know.
Who was named after, right? Who
absolutely. The person who was named after, who was actually one of the first black millionaires ever.
Yeah, and she used her
rights. She sold her rights to her food products that she made to the Quaker Company, and was one of, I think, the first black woman in America who became a millionaire.
And she used her money for good, right? Her money and influence for good.
And people will not know this now. They won't know the full history behind it, because now they're looking at this. Right. They're looking at this as this is a symbol of oppression. Well, no, it really wasn't. I mean, but that's the thing. They use people's good intentions. That's the thing. Nobody wants to support a product that is, something that's based upon slavery or something like that. Well, nobody wants to do that. So they're taking people's good intentions and using them against them. Yeah.
So same thing with slavery.
Was a product that made this woman a millionaire, and she did a lot of good work with that money and stuff. Nobody's ever going to know that now, and now it's going to disappear from the face of history, and nobody's going to know the story behind it or anything else about it, or even the roots of the slave culture or whatever that it was pointing out this whole stereotype of. They're not going to know that. They're going to try to delete that from the history books now, moving forward. That's how they rewrite history.
On this exactly the same, right? Good intentions, slavery, and history. They're removing all these statues of these Confederate generals and personalities, right? Under the guise of it's offensive, right? It just shows racism. But it's a temporary thing. Keep in mind, again, they're trying to influence people with emotion. They're getting them to do an emotional response instead of a considered, thoughtful response. They cannot think. Things move at the speed of Twitter, right? And so they burn down history. So now just consider that it wouldn't take but two more generations. Sorry, it wouldn't take but two more generations. No, not you. Right? Okay. 2 more generations.
Oh, me? I'll settle down.
Yeah, you.
We're all blue hairs here. I'm the blue hairiest. I'm the oldest guy here. But all they got to do, again, is remove these statues under the name, it's offensive and represents slavery. But in 2 generations, the people wouldn't ask, who is this person? Right? So they just simply wipe it away. They can wipe away all of history and rewrite it. And just, let's say they wanted to erase the whole idea of the Civil War. It wouldn't be that difficult because it's getting there. The last people who the gal who was the last one receiving Civil War pension just passed away. So now everyone who was alive is now dead, right? Again, it only takes a couple of generations until the history can be completely rewritten to the point where they don't know. Yeah. And I suspect this has happened many, many, many times throughout the course of human history. For example, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, right, where they wiped out the totality of human knowledge, or a great deal of it, in one swell foop, if you will. To me, again, them removing Aunt Jemima, removing the statues, these historical statues, is far more sinister than just a response against the evils of slavery. It's exactly Orwellian. By removing all the past history, they can immediately rewrite it into be whatever they want at any time.
It's
Wikipedia, right? They change it in real time.
Right.
This is the whole barn wall idea from Animal Farm. It's exactly what it is. They're going to just rewrite it all. And now this whole era of the human experience that has shaped so much of what our modern society is right now is going to be wiped clean at some point here within the next 2-3 generations. Nobody will understand. We'll know who that these statues even existed, first of all, or what they were commemorating, or what the real story was behind it all. So there you go. That's how you just completely erase and rewrite history. And it's a sad thing, really. And then you got to take into consideration the way that they're trying to keep us all separated and stuff with this whole coronavirus lockdown thing and the social distancing and all of that, the whole 9 yards of that nonsense. People aren't going to be communicating about this stuff anymore. After this, once it disappears and it's gone from the history textbooks and the older generation passes on, these younger generations, they're only going to know what their computer tells them that has happened.
Well, a lot of people are already there.
Can change it. Can change every day.
Change it at the click of a button.
And then you introduce the idea of the Mandela effect, where we can't trust our memories. Things have changed, and then you can't. Did I really, or did I not? And I find that fascinating. That this is exactly the story of Animal Farm, the barn wall. They couldn't quite remember. But we're being taught. Was it Ed McMahon? Was it American Family, or was it Sweepstake? Was it the other Sweepstake? So can we not quite remember? Were the jet engines in the front or in the back? I thought I remembered it one way. Did Dolly have braces or not? So when some things apparently do change and other things we're not sure, but we're told everything is just misremembering, you can't quite trust your own memory. You can't trust your eyes. It looks flat, but it's round. It feels like it's stationary, but you're moving at millions of miles an hour when you add it all up in 8 different vectors. You can't trust your own senses.
It's real because it looks so fake.
Because it looks so fake, right? I'm a genius because I sound like a complete dumbass. Elon Musk, right? So when you add these things up, they're telling you don't trust your lion eyes, don't trust your own senses. Listen to us, listen to the authority. If it's not, Anderson Cooper telling you, if it's not on a trusted authoritative source, it's fake news. You can't believe it. So that seems to be the takeaway message that's happening right now. You can't trust your memory, right? You can't trust your senses. You can't be trusted even to make your own decisions, because you don't have the right to say no to a vaccine. So they're taking away your right to choose and your ability to choose, as well as many people's desire to choose. They'd rather just be told what to do. It makes it easier. Just tell me what to do and let me do it. Again, we here, I think all of us support the idea of doing exactly the opposite. Start with a foundation of skepticism, assume everything they say is untrue or misdescribed, and move forward from there, because we can demonstrate that almost all of it is in error.
Well, precisely, and that's a whole thing in and of itself. The whole Mandela effect idea. It's kind of disturbing to look at, because I think everybody, to one degree or another, is affected by this. We all have these memories of things that have changed, and we've seen how disturbing this could be on the face of it, because you do kind of start questioning your own judgment and your own memory, and that's kind of the place that they want us. So that's kind of one of the tools that they're using to get us to really question our observations. So, it takes away a whole huge chunk of the human experience when you learn by your own direct observation and stuff like that. If you can't trust that, then your fallback is to trust an authority figure to tell you what to do. And
as we've demonstrated,
that's kind of what they're looking for.
Right. As we demonstrated over and over, they need consent. And so when you take away a person's ability to make a thoughtful decision and simply consent by proxy, right? We defer our decision because you're smarter than us, or they get into crowd mentality. Again, Twitter outrage. Yes, because these, gerbil lives matter, right? When they push a narrative, they take people's good intentions, right, and they twist them, and so people just now defer their decision making to proxy, to whatever the crowd is doing, and this cult-like mentality that you can't speak out in any way that challenges that, or you're done, right? And they're going to burn you down. They'll take a tweet that you put out 5, 6, 7 years ago and say, nope, that's not acceptable now, right? So you shouldn't have done it then. And so again, this entire thing to me seems like to get people to willingly kind of consent in advance. Yeah, whatever you say, whatever you tell me next. Okay, what are you outraged about? I don't know. They haven't told me yet. Right? I haven't got my tweet yet. They'll tell me what to be pissed off. I mean, we see this. Now you're going to cut your hair short. Women, cut your hair short to either show support for BLM. How does being a skinhead help with that? I don't get it. Or I just saw news reports today that are coming out saying that women should cut their hair short because that'll help with COVID. Again, doesn't make any sense, but it seems like their intention is to get women to cut their hair off for whatever purpose. And to me, again, remember the idea that in the Tula Society and in many other, again, cultures, long hair is, again, with this antenna, right? That there was that group of Native Americans in World War II that they were expert trackers. Yep. And they when they got them in, they cut off all their hair and they couldn't do it anymore suddenly. They didn't have the same senses. And they said it was because that was their antenna. And according to, again, in the Tula Society, the Theosophic Society in Germany prior to World War II, with Blavatsky, they grew their hair very long. And they said it was a spiritual antenna, so that it fed their intuition and helped them tune in. So back to what Wayne was saying earlier, right, with this, morphic resonance being we're an antenna and we're tuned in to this and we're supposed to be listening. That hair may have something to do with it, and that may be why they want women to cut off their hair. So they're remember, women's intuition. You think there's a connection there with long hair and intuition? I think there could be something to it, right? So now they want women to cut off their hair for a variety of reasons, which all seem, again, like use your good intentions, whether that's to support, the oppressed people or to help keep people safe with the beer bug. They want them to cut off their hair. It's weird, and they're doing it, right? They're doing it.
There's a video that apparently is making the rounds from about 6 years ago that someone sent me that I speak to in England, actually. And I tore it apart for him. And it was this woman doing a lecture on how the term white people and the concept of white people didn't exist before. I believe it was the 1600s. I don't remember what year. And I tore it to shreds, and I pointed out to him that this woman is completely just stirring the shit in the pot to do so. And I mean, it was ridiculous. She was acting like for the only time that racism and classism, and she was intermingling the two, ever existed was when white landowners, completely overlooking the fact that the reason why the colonies were there in the first place was because the king of that country, of England at the time, put them there. They gave them the land and backed it up with the power of the British Empire. And of course, it wasn't just the English doing it. It was also the Spanish and the Dutch and the French. It's amazing to me that people were just, they put something out like this video, it goes viral, and all the outrage and all that. It's like, I don't think you're realizing history. I mean, I knew all that stuff that this woman rattled off in this thing since grade school. It was just simple, basic stuff about how the colonies were formed and everything, but she twisted it in a way, and of course put a socialism slant into it. Don't think I missed that part. This is the kind of nonsense, and maybe we could tear that apart sometime if we wouldn't get the stream pulled. But it's insane the way she just tried to paint the picture of how white people were evil. It's like, no, people who are in charge always want to stay in charge. You just happen to be pointing out that in this case, it was white landowners who did have some slaves, and not all slaves are black. These things were over and over and over again. Humans are tribal. Humans also like to idolize things and look up to things and all that. So the whole thing is crazy. I mean, they're just completely overlooking the fact that in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Irish, especially in New York after the potato famine, were completely smashed down upon and used as slaves. They didn't use that term, of course, but that's what they were. They were completely abused beyond all belief. Why? Because they could be. Because they were coming in droves.
Apparently, the first slaves in the U.S. were 100 Irish children that came over. Before any darker-skinned folks came over, the first slaves were 100 Irish kids that were sold into slavery. So, I mean, slavery is bad. It doesn't matter, what you put on it. Selling another person is, to me, inherently evil. But, back to, again, the idea that there are twisting history and presenting it in a way that is untrue, right? Fundamentally untrue. And not just history, but, again, we've demonstrated over and over. They're presenting the material sciences. They're presenting medical science, right? They turned it upside down from a natural, healthy, nature-based system to allopathy, which is psychopathy, right? It is death. It institutionalized death, right? But under the guise of healing. And most doctors now believe it because they're told they're doing good without any idea. They never ask about what are you eating, what are you doing, what's your emotional health like, right? They never ask those questions. Here's a pill, right? Because I got to make some money because I got to pay off my student loans, and they're doing good. Right. So, but they have misrepresented every aspect of the natural world. That if you think there's anything behind the veil, especially that there might be sentient beings right out there that you can sense, you're crazy. Right. You need a pill. Right. Don't look at the sun because that'll blind you. So no sun gazing for you. Don't trust your lying eyes. The ancient people were so dumb they thought it was flat too. You dummy. Right. So they take every narrative, turn it upside down, and gaslight you, tell you that you're crazy or stupid, or just downright bullheaded. If you don't take these, I mean, even now that we're seeing numerous articles come out that say that people that refuse or push back against mask wearing are psychopaths, right, or mentally ill. And I can't count the number of times in the last 3 years that I've seen articles appear, and some of them in peer-reviewed journals that say people who believe in conspiracy theories are mental and going from crazy to now dangerous. Right. This is, I think, again, dangerous to us because that is how we're being presented to the rest of society. And many of them who believe it because, again, they've deferred their decision-making process in advance to those in authority. And those in authority say this, and they just follow right along. And it creates its own consciousness. So back to this idea of consciousness and panpsychism, they're creating an alternate reality, if you will, that many people are living in. And that's why you feel so weird and alone when you wake up from it, right? Because you're not in the same reality, right? So
absolutely. And that's a key point. When you actually start to see through all the BS that we've been, inundated with throughout all of our cultural conditioning and stuff like that, you do start to feel a little lonely, and it's good that there's people like the good folks in our chat room and stuff that are all connecting nowadays and able to talk to one another and realize, hey, you're not alone. There's people that are seeing through it too. So it's good. I think we're at a very important crossroads in our history right now. It's a great awakening going on, and I think there's still a lot of hope to turn around some of these more nefarious plans that the power structure has in mind for us. So I think it's imperative that we keep on talking and keep on trying to, help people to see through the whole illusion that is the paradigm that we're in. And, just talk about these things, put it out there in the public perception so that people could see it and realize, you know what, you're right, that doesn't make sense. Like, why is this? And then they start to question things, and that's the whole key. That's the whole door. That's the door to getting to a better, brighter future here, is to start to question things. Right. Start questioning things, and that's where we're at, and that's why it's important that we talk about things like the nature of consciousness and stuff like that, like we have tonight.
Well, and this is a great place as we come to we're at the top of the second hour now. This is a great place for me to sort of plug the Awakening Project. I'll spam it in the chat there. You start laughing, I know. The Awakening Project's, send me an email, unintended.consequences@gmail.com. And that really, I started a project that I first announced here, on January 1st on Secrets of Saturn, to try to determine why some people wake up and some people do not, and what those characteristics are. And so we're well deep into this project now. I've got more than 350 respondents. If you'd like to join in, send me an email to, again, unintended.consequences3@gmail.com, and then you can, if you like, subscribe to my channel, just 120 or so short of 1,000 subscribers, so that would help. But start with episode 1, which is a welcome from Baldini, and that kind of gives you some background into the concept, and ultimately not just try to identify the characteristics, but if we can come up with something of a deprogramming script, so that we can identify those who might have a predisposition toward seeing the truth, and then some ways to land some seeds in fertile soil, and to choose the right soil, because you don't want to cast your pearls before swine, or that sort of thing. Play chess with pigeons, or however you want to term that. To your time, never try to teach a pig to sing, because it wastes your time and annoys the pig.
Wayne, any final words before we sign off for the night?
Right. So you want to choose people who are going to be worthy of your time, or you're going to be frustrated. Right. So.
alchemicaltechrevolution@gmail.com if you want to get in touch with me. I have been posting more things on my Alchemical Tech Revolution YouTube channel lately, and I do plan on trying to continue to put out more content on there as well. In fact, I'm going to be uploading a short video once we go off the air here tonight too, so people could look for that. Also, just working on my third book right now. Hope to have that out by the end of the summer. And that should be an interesting one. A lot of research and stuff put into that one as well. And it talks about, the current state of things and where we're heading. So with that, I'll be on again doing Sola Scriptura with Baldini on Sunday. We're going to figure out a time, because I think I might have to change the time for this coming week. So we'll figure out what time and get that posted as soon as we know. So other than that, I mean, just the usual stuff. I have books available, blah, 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 blah. People know. So, look for those. And what do you got coming up tomorrow on Crow 777 Radio, Jason?
Tomorrow we are releasing an episode with the one and only Kurt Kallenbach, and he once again had some new information to share. So we had a great discussion. And let's see, who do we have after that? Well, we haven't recorded that one yet, so I guess I'll leave that. I'll leave it as is. Anyone have any final thoughts before I sign us off here? It looks like we were having some buffering issues for a while here.
And Rose 777 and I will be back for the Poppycock Report tomorrow morning, early, 6 o'clock Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern, as we look at more Poppycock and take a more lighthearted view of the craziness that goes along around us. So I put an hour to that in on every Tuesday and Thursday morning at Rose 777 channel. You can find us there. So we got that, and then I do my live stream Saturday mornings on my channel, Unintended Consequences, at 9 a.m. Pacific. That's noon Eastern time, UTC -7.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Guys, thanks so much for being here. Absolutely appreciate everything. Everyone have a great night, and we'll see you soon.
to see. Will speak, manifest beside me, my angel, for all to see. Will speak, manifest beside me, my angel, for all to see, manifest beside me, my angel, the universe will speak, manifest beside me, my angel, for all to see.